What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Day, and on this channel I'll talk about cybersecurity, cloud security, and other life stuff. In this video, we're going to be going through a beginner's guide to AWS misconfigurations, and we're going to be going over some different ways we can learn about common mistakes when using AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, going over different services like S3, IAM, EC2, and we're going to be using Flaws.Cloud, which is essentially a series of levels that kind of walk you through these different mistakes, but you go through them practically. So it's really fun. It's kind of like a CTF for the cloud, but not really CTF-ish. It's really fun. So we're just going to get into it, and we're going to go through each level and just learn about AWS misconfigurations. And yeah, let's get into it. Alright, so we're here on our command line, and we also have a link to my website here. It's my personal blog. It's CYBERWOX.com. I have a full walkthrough of everything we're going to be doing in this challenge from level 1 to level 6, so you can definitely check it out. It's CYBERWOX. Go to the CloudSec section and scroll down to a beginner's guide to exploiting AWS misconfigurations, which we're going to be doing today. So let's navigate back to Flaws.Cloud and just get this back to normal. Alright, awesome. This is our homepage. This is Flaws.Cloud. This is brought to you by Scott Piper from Summit Cloud. He's an independent AWS security consultant. And this series takes you through a couple of levels where you learn about common mistakes in AWS, and you actually get to exploit them yourself. So it's really fun, and we're going to get right into it. We're going to start with level 1, and level 1 is buckets of fun. So see if you can find the first subdomain. So we're trying to find the first subdomain. So let's get into it. So we know we're on Flaws.Cloud. So I want to start with some domain enumeration since we're dealing with domains and buckets here. So we're going to do some domain and bucket discovery. So let's start by doing an NS lookup, right, which is the most basic form of like finding information about a domain. So Flaws.Cloud. And you can see the information about Flaws.Cloud. We see that IP address 52.218.185.138. We can also achieve the same thing by just running host Flaws.Cloud, and we'll get the same information. We see the IP address. So now that we have the IP address, we can do a reverse lookup on that IP address by running host on that IP address. So 52.218.106, and we can see that this website is pointing towards an S3 website. So S3 website in US West 2. So this is a AWS region, and this is AmazonAWS.com. So we know this is an S3 website, and we know that it is in US West 2. And since S3 can also be used for static web hosting, this is essentially what we're going to use to find our subdomain. So we already know this is an S3 website, so this is a common naming format for like how S3 websites are. So it's usually the domain, the domain, and then .s3.amazonaws.com, and yeah, that is the first domain. So that's kind of what we're looking for. We have some information here, but this kind of looks ugly. We can see some things. We see some hints. We'll see the index, we see the logo, we see different things. We also see a secret file, which is pretty interesting. But I really want to interact more with it from the command line. So let's try to see if we can list the content of the bucket, right? Let's see if we can get the same information just by listing the content of the bucket. So we're gonna do AWS S3. So we're gonna do basic enumeration here, and we're just gonna do ls, use the S3 prefix, and we're gonna do Flaws.Cloud, and going to specify the region because we know it's US West 2 from this information from our domain lookup. So region is US West 2. Boom. So we get this error, and it says unable to locate credentials. You can configure credentials by running AWS configure. So this basically means that we are not authenticated. So since we're not authenticated, we don't have any form of credentials to verify our identity and our access to this bucket. So we can interact with the S3 API without any credentials. So we can actually go around this by actually specifying a no sign request, which basically means that we're telling the CLI not to sign the request or look for credentials. And in that case, that means we can anonymously access the content of S3 bucket, and we'll see if this bucket allows us to do that. So for that to work, we're going to run the same command, but this time we're going to specify no sign request, and this is going to send a request without signing it, and we're going to anonymously see if we can access the bucket, and we can list the content of the buckets anonymously. So we can see the exact same thing we saw on the S3 website. So the hints, the index, I think the index is somewhere here, right here. We see robots, and then we see the secret file, which is what I believe we're looking for here. All right, so let's grab the secret file, and we'll copy it, and we'll add that at the end of this. Actually, they want to clear that out, so it's / secret file. So all right, so we found the secret file, and level 2 is at this. Awesome. So that was the end of level 1. That was actually the solution to level 1. Before we actually go over the lessons learned, we could have also have viewed the content of the website like this. So this XML content, we can also view it if we curl that. So if we do curl tag s http //flaws.cloud, and this is just something extra. It doesn't really it's not really that important, but it was kind of something cool I found out when I was going through the challenge. And we can curl it, and we get the exact same thing XML format, but it looks kind of ugly, and we can use this pipe XML lint, and this put it in human readable format, and we get the exact same thing that we saw, but in a really nicer and cleaner way. So this was something cool that I found. We've seen this exact same thing, but in a much nicer format. So that was something cool I found, and yeah, that's the end of this challenge. So basically, we were able to find the subdomain, which was like the s3.amazon AWS.com, which is like the format for static S3 hosting. And yeah, so let's look at the lessons we've learned. So on AWS, you can set up S3 buckets with all sort of permissions and functionality, including using them to host static files. So a number of people accidentally open them up with permissions that are too loose, just like how you shouldn't allow directly listings on web servers. So you shouldn't allow bucket listings. So basically, you shouldn't allow, like what we were able to do, we should not have been able to do that, right? And it goes on to kind of explain more about that. So I believe AWS actually has fixed this with like the default settings on like how you can set up your bucket. And you could also like find out more information about this if you went through the hints. So the hints actually guides you through everything we just did. The domain enumeration, bucket enumeration stuff we just did. As you can see here, the same bucket enumeration we just did. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. That was it for level 1. And then we can proceed to level 2. And I'll see you in the next video for level 2, where we go over the next stage, which is basically a slight twist to level 1. Alright, so we're back right where we stopped in the last video. And we learned some pretty cool lessons in the last video. Basically, making sure our buckets are not... the permissions are not set in such a way whereby everyone, meaning everyone on the internet, can have access to the content of our bucket. So basically, we're able to get access to stuff without even signing the request. So today we're going to be continuing to level 2, and we're just going to get right into it. You can check out my blog, CYBERWOX.com, for a walkthrough of this challenge if you want to. I'm going to refer to my notes because they're more convenient to look at. So let's get into it. So level 2, I'm just going to use this one. So the next level is fairly similar with a slight twist. You're going to need your own AWS account for this, and you just need the free tier. So the purpose of like this is because we're going to be trying to actually do some authenticated access, and what this means is we're going to be trying with a authenticated AWS user. Now, this authenticated AWS user doesn't have to be related to the account that the S3 bucket is hosted on. It can be any AWS user. So I've already created some credentials for my personal AWS account, and I'm going to basically be using it to complete this challenge. So in order for you to configure your credentials, you have to, first of all, create an account in the AWS if you've not. So definitely create a free tier account, and then create an IAM credential, and use that credential, use the credentials, the access key and the secret access key to configure your credentials. And in order for you to configure your credentials, use this command AWS configure profile and then specify whatever name you want to use. I use Havoc. I think it's kind of cool. You know, it's kind of like a cool hacker name or whatever. But so AWS configure profile, and we'll just say random. And so it's going to ask you for an access key ID, and then you're going to use that access key that you get from your AWS account and put that in here. And then it's also going to ask you for a secret access key. You're going to use that as well and put it in there, and then you can use whatever region and whatever. So that's how you're going to do it. It's a really easy process, so you shouldn't have too much issues with that. So once you've done that, you now have a profile. You now have an AWS profile you can use to access specific resources using the command line, and you can specify that using the tag profile, as we're going to be using in this scenario. So I've already configured my profile. I have Havoc, which is the profile I have configured at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually try to access level 2 using AWS credential, and this is basically trying to access the bucket with an authorized person. So remember last time we used the tag no sign request, which means that we didn't use any credentials. So now we're going to use our credentials that we just created to access level 2. So let's try to do that. So all right, so we're going to navigate to S3, and we're going to go ahead and try to access this level 2 bucket. First of all, without any credentials, and then we're going to try to access this with our credentials that we just created. So let's start with without any credentials. So AWS S3, and remember we want to list the content. So we're just still doing our enumeration. So we're going to use the S3 prefix, and I already have this copied. So paste, and we actually do not want that HTTP. We just want to have level 2 because we're directly dealing with the bucket. And we're going to specify the region. I don't think it's necessary, but let's just do this. Okay, so we can see we get the same results. We're enabled to locate credentials, and we pretty much can access this. So let's try to use our credentials we just configured. So run this command again, and we'll specify profile. I have my profile already set up, and it's called Havoc. And we can see now we can access it. So we can access everyone.png. We can access hint 1, hint 2, index robot. So the issue with this is anyone who is authenticated to AWS can pretty much list the content of the bucket, which is it's not something we want to have in our bucket. So basically, even if I'm not authenticated to the AWS account that is actually hosting the bucket, as long as I'm authenticated to any AWS account, I can pretty much list the content of the buckets, and this is a vulnerability we don't want to have in our environment. So yeah, that's an issue with like access permissions, and that's an issue, a big issue with like cloud environments, like making sure that permissions are properly provisioned. So this is really bad because we just don't want anyone who has an AWS credential to have access to things in our bucket. So that's basically it, and we're gonna copy this again, and we're able to find the secret file, and we'll just append that. Actually, let me duplicate this, and we append that to the end of this, and oops, secret. All right, there we go. We found the secret file, and level 3 is right here. So before we go into level 3, let's kind of look at the hints that we have from here. So if you go into hint 1, it kind of goes over setting up your account and stuff, setting up your AWS credentials, right? And then if we go to hint 2, we can see the next level is here. Yeah, so basically that was it, right? So it's basically the vulnerability here is we're essentially the buckets listing has access permission set to any authenticated user, which pretty much violates the principle of list privilege. So any authenticated AWS user can pretty much access the content of the buckets, and that's basically it for level 2. That was pretty easy, that was pretty fast, and we're gonna go ahead to level 3 in the next video. So the level 3 is fairly similar, but also with a slight twist. It's time to find your first AWS key, and we'll see how that works in the next video. Alright, so we are back here in our Flaws.Cloud, and the lesson we learned from our last video was similar to the permissions from level 1, where permissions was set to everyone. You can accidentally set permissions to any authenticated AWS user, and this might mistakenly think that people might mistakenly think that it only will be users of the account, but it would be everyone who has an AWS account. AWS has fixed this vulnerability, so this setting can no longer be set in the web console, but the SDK and third-party tools sometimes allow it. So it's kind of, still possible. So being familiar with it is important. So we're going to go ahead and get started with level 3. So this time we're going to be dealing with a key, AWS key. So we have our level 3. So let's, get back to enumerating our level 3 bucket. So we're going to copy that. And once again, I'm going to use my notes from here. And so we're going to start with the enumeration. So AWS S3 and LS. So I'm going to see what's in the bucket, and we're going to specify the name of the bucket. So we're now in level 3, so we're going to use level 3 base selection, but want to take out the HTTP because we don't need that. All right, and we're just going to use our profile. So make sure to specify the profile that you made. So my profile is Havoc. All right, so we see that we have a bunch of things. We have authenticated users, the PNG, the hints, and other things. So we can also see we have this .git file, and this means that there has been some code stuff going on here. So we can use gitlog, and gitlog is basically a utility that is used to review and read the history of everything that happens in the repository. So since we know there's git here, we can use gitlog to find out what has happened here. So let's do gitlog and the git repository. So actually, we first of all have to, I believe we have to actually dump the contents of this S3 buckets before we can do a gitlog on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my desktop, and okay, so we're gonna create a file for this, a directory for this, and we're gonna run that AWS S3 command again, 3ls, and what we're gonna do is this time we're gonna use the sync command. So the sync command essentially helps us actually like download the contents of the S3 buckets to our local computer. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do that, and we're gonna specify the directory where we want that to be. So desktop, and it's gonna be exposed bucket. All right. Awesome. So if we go into exposed bucket ls, we can see we have that, and we can do git log here. And voila, we have that. We have the commit, this commit, and we also see there's a message here, and the person says, oops, accidentally added something I shouldn't have. So what we can do with this is we've already used the git log to see what has happened here, and we were able to see this. So these numbers are basically the hash for the commits, so we can check them out. So we can use the git checkout command to check those out. So we can specify. Let's start with this hash. Let's see what's happened here. I'm gonna check both. And all right, so we see here you're in the attached head state, blah blah blah, and nothing interesting here. So we're gonna do the same thing for this one. So we're gonna do git checkout this time for this one. So git checkout and paste selection. And here we go. We see that the previous head position was B64C8DC. Oops, accidentally added something I shouldn't have. Head is now F52EC03. So let's run the ls command again. And now we can see we have access to these access keys. And initially we did not. We didn't have those access keys, but now we have access keys because we're able to kind of use the git the previous state of the repository to kind of put this back into the previous state of the repository. So now we can look at the content of the access keys, and we can see we have access to an account. So this is like kind of how like access keys could get leaked. And once you have access to access keys, you can pretty much assume a role or whatever role the access keys have access to, like whatever role the user or the entity that owns this access keys has access to, you can automatically assume that role. So we're going to use this access key and secret access key to create our own profile that we're going to use this credentials for. So what we're going to do is we're going to do AWS configure and profile, and we're going to use a name. What name should I use? Profile Hailstorm. I'm trying to just use things that are like kind of related to cloud, right? Hailstorm. All right, so Hailstorm, and you can pretty much use anything. You can use your name or whatever. I'm just kind of using things that I find cool. So we're gonna copy that access key, and this is how you actually create your profile, like I showed in the other video. So paste that, and then we'll also copy the secret access key. And these are really important credentials. These are basically like the credentials that give you programmatic access to the AWS CLI and resources that are in that AWS account. So you want to make sure you really protect your access key and your secret access key. You rotate them and you don't basically use them like long term, because like if they're exposed or somehow they get leaked, then if they're still the same ones from like 3 years ago and that never got changed or rotated, that means like whoever gets access to them can pretty much do whatever you know, havoc or wreck in your environment based off of whatever permissions they have for those access keys. So want to protect your access keys very, very well. Make sure you rotate them and make sure you're not exposing them. So we already have a user we've created using those credentials, and what we're going to do is we're going to use that user to list stuff. So we're going to use that user. So we're going to use that profile. So AWS profile and Hailstorm and S3 LS. Awesome. So what we can see here, so we used the profile Hailstorm to list buckets, whatever buckets were in that this profile had access to. So we can see we have access to all the buckets now. So we can see all the buckets. So we can see level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6. So if we grab, so we're currently level 3. So if we grab this should lead us to level 4. Awesome. And if we grab this, copy that, this should lead us to level 5. All right, do not try to cheat and skip levels, but yeah, so this gives us access to, like, this is just kind of just shows us all of the rest of the buckets, and in order for us to get to level 5, we have to go through level 4. So we can't you know, have access to level 5 yet, but this is level 3 right now, and we've pretty much been able to find what we were looking for because we're able to compromise the account based off of the access we had. So you know, if someone is able to have access to your access keys and secret access keys, then they can pretty much assume the profile or the role of whoever has access to those credentials or whoever those credentials were provisioned for. So you really want to protect those and make sure that they're not just easily accessible to anyone and they don't get leaked. So let's see what else we have. So basically the vulnerability here is this bucket listing gives access to everyone and also leaks AWS keys by accidentally committing it to a Git repo that was kept in the bucket. Leaked keys should be immediately revoked. So at the time when this person discovered that they accidentally leaked those keys should have immediately be revoked. So you can easily go into AWS environment and deactivate those keys or actually delete those keys so that no one else, so even if someone has access to them, they cannot use those keys to actually create a profile and have access to stuff in your account. So in this case, you know, they should have immediately revoked those keys. So yeah, just make sure you're always protecting your access keys, because that's also like a major attack vector when it comes to like AWS compromises. So let's kind of look at what they had in stock for us with the hints. Hint 1, what do we see here? So yeah, we were able to get the content of the bucket. So we use the AWS S3 sync command right here all the way up. And yeah, so that helped us kind of bring the content of buckets to our local directory, which was an exposed bucket on our desktop. And next thing we did was we used git log to look at the history of the repo, and then we used git checkout to check out the hash of the commits, and we were able to find some information in one of them. And we also used the credentials we got to create a profile and use that profile to list the content of S3 in that the account had access to. And yeah, that was it. So that's the end of level 3, and level 4 is next. But before we go to level 4, this is the lessons learned. So people often leak access keys and try to cover up their mistakes without revoking the keys. Like we mentioned, you should always revoke any access keys that could have been leaked or replaced. Roll your secrets early and often. So rolling your secrets means like rotating your credentials, like not leaving the credentials too long. If they've been there and they've probably been leaked, or they're not in use, or just rotate them. Like keep rotating your credentials, right? You don't want to have them. They're not supposed to be long-term credentials. They're supposed to be used short-term. So this is also a story about like Instagram's $1 million bug. It's a really interesting case study where a bug bounty researcher uncovered a series of flaws, including finding an S3 bucket that had tarred the GZ archives of various revisions and files. One of those archives contained AWS credentials that then allowed the researcher to access all S3 buckets of Instagram. Imagine being able to access all of the S3 buckets of Instagram, the amount of data you have access to, just because you were able to find AWS credentials that were not rolled. So it's really a big deal. So it's really important to know that. And then what else we have here? So another interesting issue this level has exhibited, although not that worrisome, is that you can restrict the ability to list only certain buckets in the AWS. So if you want to give an employee the ability to list some buckets in the account, they'll be able to list them all. And we can see that because we're able to list all the buckets in the account right here, all of the buckets in the account. So the key used to discover this bucket can see all the buckets in the account. As you can see here, you can't see what is in the buckets, but you will know that they exist. Similarly, be aware that buckets use a global namespace, meaning that the bucket names must be unique across all customers. So if you created a bucket named this, or something that is supposed to be a secret, it's technically possible for someone to discover that bucket exists. So even being able to list the bucket is not something we want just anyone to be able to do, right? They should only have access to buckets they need to do the org, and that always brings us back to the principle of least privilege. So in order to avoid this mistake, always roll your secret if you suspect they've been compromised or made public or stored or shared incorrectly. Roll early, roll often. And rolling secrets means revoking the keys, meaning that revoking access to the keys or deleting them, creating new credentials. Delete them from the AWS account and generate new ones. All right, that was it for level 3. For level 4, you're going to need to access to the web page running on an EC2, and it'll be useful to know that a snapshot was made of that EC2 shortly after Nginx was set up. This is going to be fun. It's going to be a really cool one. I can't wait to get into this, but that was it for level 3. I hope you found this fun. This has been really fun, and yeah, that's it for today's video, and I will see you in the next video where we go over level 4. Alright, so we are back here in our console at level 4, and let me clear out my screen. Alright, so for level 4, we're going to need access to the web page running on an EC2 instance at this host. So we're dealing with an EC2 instance here, and it says it will be useful to know that a snapshot was made of that instance shortly after Nginx was set up on it. So let's go over this and see what we can find. Also, in order to get the most out of this part of the challenge, make sure you're logged into your free tier account that you created earlier in the video, because you're going to be needing it. So I'm going to refer to my notes. So let's just go over to level 4. All right, so we're going to start by looking at the host that we have. So we have this host right here. It's kind of like what we did for the bucket. We're just going to do a little bit of like domain enumeration. So I'm going to say host and then paste that. All right. So we see it's for an EC2 instance on this public IP address in US West 2. And that's good information for us. So we know that there's an EC2 instance, but we can't really access it, right? If we try to, let's see, if we try to create a new tab and we put that there. We see it's asking us for username and password, and we don't know what the username and password is. So I think the eventual goal is to be able to eventually log into this EC2 instance. So we are currently not able to log into it, right? So let's keep that in mind. But we know that it is there, right? We know it's using Ubuntu, running Nginx, right? Okay, so let's see how we can eventually get access to this instance. All right, so what we're gonna do next is let's start by finding the account ID using the creds we had from our previous leak. So in the last video, we were able to access some credentials from a bucket that leaked AWS credentials. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use those credentials to see what we have access to. So we're gonna say AWS profile, and I use the alias Hailstorm. And we're gonna say STS get colored identity. All right, so it just gives us like information about the user, so the user ID, the account. So this is really good information for us. So we have the AWS account ID here. This is something that we can use to find more information, right? So we have the account ID here. So what we're gonna do is we can see we also have a backup user as well. So this is this is the user that the account, the credentials were provisioned for. So let's see what we can do with this. So let's see all the snapshots associated with this user, and we are able to denote that there's a snapshot associated with the user because it was mentioned here. So a snapshot was made of the EC2 shortly after Nginx was set up. So let's use that information we have to see all the snapshots associated with the user. So we're going to say AWS profile, the alias we used, so Hailstorm, and then we're going to say EC2 describe snapshots, and then specify the owner ID we just found out from the get color identity. So owner ID, and we'll grab that and paste that. All right, so we need to specify a region. So we know this is in US West 2, as we had from our initial enumeration. So let's add that. So we say region US West 2. All right, awesome. So we can see the description. The snapshot is not encrypted. We know the owner, it completed, and this is the volume and everything. So we see this is an unencrypted snapshot that this backup user has access to. So we try to find more, right? So let's run the same command. And this time we're not going to specify the owner ID because we want to see everything that is related to this account. So the owner ID specified the account, but if we run this command again without the owner ID, okay, we have to specify the region. So region, I would say region US East 1, US West 2, sorry. US West 2. Okay, let's try that command again, but this time let's put the region before the owner ID. So say right here, region US West 2. Let's see. Actually, let's take that out, and let's just take out the owner ID altogether. And we'll just wait for this to load and see the results. All right, there we go. You can see a ton of information, like a whole lot of things. But let's just gonna look at it from here, and we can see a ton of snapshots here. We see a bunch of snapshots, right? That this account has access to, a lot of snapshots, and we should not be able to, but this is because we already have those credentials from the leak, and it gives us the ability to actually have access to all of this information. And we see different things, and this is probably snapshots from daily backups and stuff, because this is a backup user, as we found out earlier on in our enumeration, right? So this user is a backup, so they're probably storing the snapshots. So imagine if someone was able to have access to all the snapshots, they can actually recreate that instance from the snapshot that was saved, and that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So let's get into it. So what we're going to do next is so we have the snapshot. We can actually mount that snapshot and see what's in it, right? So we can actually take that snapshot, mount it in our own AWS account, and see what's in that snapshot. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a volume using the snapshot, but specifically in the US West 2 region. And this time we actually want to do that in our account. So we want to actually use our own AWS account. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. So AWS profile havoc, and we're gonna say EC2 create volume, and we're gonna specify the availability zone. So availability zone. Did I spell that right? No. Availability. English is just so hard. Availability zone. All right, availability zone. And we're gonna say US West 2A, because you know this is in US West 2. So everything we want to make sure it's in US West 2 so that the snapshot can work. And we're referring back to the original snapshot we found out. This one right here. This is what we're going to be using for the information we're looking for. So this is what we're going to be using to mount the volume. So US West 2A, and then we're going to specify the region, US West 2, West 2, and we want to specify the snapshot ID. So snapshot ID, and we can grab that from that original snapshot we saw for this user. So snapshot ID is this. Let's grab that and all the way down, and we can paste that. So I missed the S, so let me put that in. S. All right, there we go. Awesome. So we're able to create this volume. So we see it's in the availability zone US West 2A as we specified. It's not encrypted, and we can actually check that in our AWS account. So let's go to AWS account and let's make sure we're in the US West 2 region, and we'll go into that, because if we're not in the right region, we're not going to be able to see it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into volumes, and here we have it. So here in volumes, this volume is called volume OC9895299. All right, so this is the volume that we're looking for. So let me just take out that name, because this was from when I initially did the challenge. All right, so this is volume OC9895299, and this is it. So let me take this out and save. And I'm going to rename this leaked. So this is the volume we just mounted. All right, so don't worry about these other volumes. So this don't matter right now. So this is the volume we're actually concerned about. And we can see it was just created today. Today's 17th. And we can see it's from the snapshot that we used, snapshot ID that we used from that compromised backup user. All right, so now that we have that, what are we going to do next? So we've gone into our console, we've seen the volume. Now we can create an instance from the volume. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create an EC2 instance, and we're going to use that volume. So let's go to EC2 dashboard, and let's launch an instance. Launch instance. Okay. The interface has changed. That's interesting. Wow, that's really interesting. The last time I did this, the interface was like still the old interface. That's actually really interesting. But yeah, let's name this AWS so like EC2 leaked, and we're gonna use we can use any like Linux instance we want, but I'm gonna use Ubuntu, the free tier eligible one, and we're gonna use all of the defaults for key pair. Actually, I want to create a new key pair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new key pair. I'm going to name these licked, and then I'm going to create that key pair. All right, so I'm going to save that, and I'm actually going to move that into my directory. So let's move downloads slash, what did I name it, leaked, yeah, to my desktop and exposed bucket. All right, perfect. And let me navigate it to my exposed bucket. All right, awesome. We have the leaked. What is it? Yeah, we have it. We have it right here. All right, awesome. So that's cool. Because we're gonna be SSHing into that instance from our Kali machine. Okay, so what we're gonna do is add a new volume, and awesome. So we're gonna specify the device name. So dev sde. All right, and then we're gonna specify that snapshot that we had, and let's paste that snapshot ID. There we go. Finally found the snapshot ID. So we're gonna select that. All right, awesome. So I'm gonna make sure this is set to not encrypted because you know this is not encrypted, and yeah. So it took a little bit of time to find that snapshot, which I don't really know why, but let's see what else we have to do. We have done all of that. Make sure it's set to delete on termination. All right, perfect. And yeah, everything looks good, and we're gonna go ahead and create this EC2 instance. So launch instance. All right, awesome. So we can go to view all instances, and again, we're gonna wait till this instance is provisioned. It takes a little bit of time, so we're gonna just skip over to that part of the video when the instance has been provisioned. All right, so our EC2 instance is now running. So let's go ahead and continue. Okay, so we have our key, our SSH key. So what we're gonna do is we're going to change the permissions for the key so we can use that to SSH into the instance. So let's see. Let's do Shamad 400 so we can have read and execute permission for the key. So then I named the key leaked.pem. Oops, spell that right. 400 leaked.pem. All right, cool. So now we can now try to SSH into this instance. We're gonna need its public IP address. So let's grab that, and it's this. Awesome. So what we're gonna do is we're going to do SSH tag I, and we're gonna specify the key. So leak.pem, and then Ubuntu at that IP address. Pay selection. Oops. And then copy the IP address. So let me grab the IP address again. So 54.185.101.85. And we're just going to say yes. All right, awesome. So we are now in that instance. So we've been able to SSH into the instance. So what are we going to do next? We're going to list information about all the available blocks on this device. So lsblk. And we can see currently we have all of these blocks, and then we have these ones, XVDA1 and XVDA2, XVDA1 and XVDE1. So the XVDE1 is the actual one we mounted. It's the second one mounted aside from the main one that comes with the instance. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna mount that. So we're gonna mount dev XVDE1, and we're gonna do this. All right, so now if we run lsblk again, we can see that it's mounted. So XVDE1 is mounted. So now we're in this instance, right? We see that we have access to an instance we should not have access to because we're able to use a snapshot to mount an instance. So we can kind of just look around and see what's in the instance, right? Let's go into that mount directory. So mnt. All right, so we see we have a bunch of like system files. Let's go into our home directory. Home. What do we have? We have Ubuntu. So we're gonna go into Ubuntu, and all right. So we see we have two files here. Let's see what is in metadata. All right, so just a bunch of like metadata about the host, and then we see another file here. We see setup nginx.shell. So let's cat what is inside that. Okay, so this is a script for the username and password for the EC2 instance. And you can see the username is Flaws and the password is ncp, whatever this is. So we can use these credentials to try to log into that instance. So let's go there and let's use the username and password. Let me copy this, and the username is Flaws. The password is this. Boom. And we're able to log in. So we're able to use the initial leaked credentials to SSH into the instance using the snapshot, and now we're able to find credentials on the host again, and we're able to have access to EC2 instance directly. And this gives us access to level 5. So we're almost done with this challenge, but this was really fun. So let's look at what we learned from this particular level. So AWS allows you to make snapshots of EC2 and databases, which is RDS. And the main purpose of this is to make backups. But people sometimes use snapshots to get access back to their own EC2s when they forget the passwords. This allows an attacker to get access to things, and snapshots are normally restricted to your own account. So a possible attack would be an attacker getting access to an AWS key, like we did, that allows them to start or stop and do other things with EC2, and then uses that snapshot and uses that to snapshot an EC2 instance and spin up an EC2 instance with that volume in your environment to get access to it. Like all backups, you need to be cautious about protecting them. So basically, like, this is kind of like getting access back into a AWS environment from leaked credentials and just credentials lying around, as well as snapshots, using snapshots that are readily available to whoever had those credentials. So really bad stuff going on here. So basically, make sure that your EC2 snapshots are not publicly accessible, and also make sure that you restrict who has access to your snapshots. Also, be sure to protect your credentials and do not just leave them lying around, because that was like the initial access vector. So these are different levels to and different stages of the attack, and we're able to go through them and see kind of how they work. So this is really cool stuff. So with that said, that's level 4 done. Level 5, EC2 has a simple HTTP only proxy on it, and these are some examples of its usage. See if you can use this proxy to figure out how to list the contents of level 6 bucket that has a hidden directory in it. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next level, in the next video, which is going to be level 5. Alright, so we're here in our AWS console, and we're going to be continuing from where we stopped, level 5, and this EC2 has a simple HTTP only proxy on it. Here are some examples of its usage. So these are some examples of the usage, and see if we can use this proxy to figure out how to list the contents of level 6. So let's get started. So we know that this is a EC2 instance, and there's something called metadata for EC2 instances, or metadata in general. It's just basically data about data. So the instance metadata is divided into categories, for example, host names, events, and security groups. So basically, it's just data about data, and we're going to see how this might be a good or bad thing in this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to curl the metadata of this instance, so actually of this proxy. So what we're going to do is head back here and grab this URL, and this URL actually leads back to the homepage. So if we click on that, so that leads back to the homepage. These are also some usage. So what we're going to do is curl that. So let's paste that, and then we're going to use so the metadata services utilized using this IP address. So 169.254 repeated. So 169.254 again, and /. Okay, so I repeated that twice. So Flaws.Cloud. Just take this out. All right, so we see a bunch of things here from 2007 all the way to 2021. Let's look at what we have in latest. So let's do latest. All right, so we have dynamic metadata and user data. So let's dig deeper. So let's go into metadata. So metadata. Let's see what we have in here. All right, so we have a ton of information here. We have all of these things, and we can actually access all of these things through the web interface, through like our browser interface. So if we just go here and we actually just open our browser interface, actually I'm at a new tab, and pull this over here, and we paste that URL, so we can see we have access to all of these things. Let's just pick a random one. Let's see network. So /network, and we can see we have interfaces. So it just keeps going on and on. Interfaces, and MACs. I believe it should be like MAC addresses, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so this is a MAC address. So like this is basically data about the instances or the instance that we're dealing with, and we have a ton of information here. But I think what is most important to us here is actually IAM. So let's go back to our instance. So let's go back to our terminal and let's do IAM. All right, so we see information and some security credentials, and let's dig deeper into that. So we're gonna go for security credentials, as we can see here, and we see flaws. Okay, so let's see what's in flaws. Flaws. All right, so we see that we have credentials again. So once again, these are credentials that we can just access just through metadata. And we've seen in all of the stages, like anytime we have access to credentials, we can always create a profile. And that means we can have permissions that whatever that profile has access to, right? So always make sure that there's no access to credentials, because once we get credentials, we can pretty much get access to the environment. So we're going to use those credentials to create a profile. And this time, what we're going to do is we're going to, once again, AWS profile, AWS configure. So AWS configure profile. And I'll name this profile Tornado. And so we'll copy that access key ID from here and paste that in here, and copy that secret access key and paste that again. We'll just leave the defaults the same. All right, so we have that access key ID and we have that secret access key, but we also have a token, and that means that we can also add this token to our credentials. So what we want to do is we want to actually we're going to have to edit our AWS credentials, which is stored in our home directory. So let's go ahead and navigate to our home directory and go edit our AWS credentials. All right, so open a new tab, and I'm just going to be, so this is my home directory. I'm going to go into, I'm going to cd AWS, and we can see here we have config and we have credentials. So if we do nano credentials, we can see all of the credentials I currently have. Some of these are actually inactive because like I already rotated them and like created new profiles out of them, but I'm gonna blow these out just in case. But we're gonna copy that token that we have. So let's copy that and copy selection, and we're gonna actually add that to the most recent profile we created, which is Tornado. So let's go all the way down. AWS session token equals, let me copy that again, and I'll copy this. Oh, missed the I. So I'll copy this and copy selection and paste it over there. All right, so pasted that. So we're gonna Control X, Y, and enter. So we've added those credentials, and what we're gonna do is go back to this and clear. So now we've added the session token and everything. We're gonna try to list level 6 bucket because now we have credentials that can allow us possibly do that, and our goal is to list the contents of level 6. So if we had initially tried to just do AWS S3 LS and copy this, so we'll copy this, and we try to do S3 : / and just paste that there. We'll see we won't be able to access it. If we tried no sign request, no sign request, same thing, access denied, because we don't have the right credentials. If we had tried to use our other profile, try Havoc, it wouldn't work because it doesn't have the right credentials. If we had tried Cumulus, I think we created Cumulus, it wouldn't work. So only Tornado that we created early on will work. So Tornado is the one we just edited. So we're gonna go ahead and use Tornado. And there we go. We can see that Tornado has access to this bucket and can list the content of this bucket. And in this bucket, we can see that we have the index of HTML as well as this file right here. So let's add that to the end of this. So gonna put that, oops, gonna put that and paste that right there. All right, to add /, able to locate credentials. I'll show it one more time. Profile. Okay, there we go. Profile Tornado. Awesome. So we can see, we can list the contents of this file. So hint 1, hint 2, the contents of this bucket. So and we can easily also do that just by grabbing this and just navigate into that over here. Actually, supposed to use when we're trying to do it through the web to the web console, we have to use HTTP. So HTTP. All right, there we go. So that is the hidden directory right here. We're able to find that. And once again, this was just because we're able to find credentials just lying around. And we're able to find that through the instance metadata. So let's look at what we learned. So the IP address 169.254.169.254 is a magic IP in the cloud world. AWS, Azure, Google, DigitalOcean, and others use this to allow cloud resources to find out metadata about themselves. Some, such as Google, have additional constraints on the request, such as requiring it to use metadata flavor Google as an HTTP header and refusing requests with an X forwarder for header. AWS has recently created a new IMDSv2 that requires special headers, a challenge and a response, and other protections, but many AWS accounts have not enforced this. If you can make any sort of HTTP request from an EC2 to that IP, you will likely get back information the owner would prefer you not see. And there's an example of this problem where this researcher discovered that Prezi allowed you to point their servers to the URL, add a URL to include as content in a slide, and this allowed you to point to the metadata service and provided access key for the instance profile. So imagine if you have the access key for the instance profile. That's pretty much access to the EC2 instance. Also, a similar problem to getting access to the IAM profile access key is access to the EC2's user data, which some people use to pass secrets to the EC2, such as API keys or credentials. So user data is pretty much like where you can put like bootstrap scripts, and if you put in bootstrap scripts, you could potentially put like secrets in there or like credentials that you want to use to like log in while the EC2 instance is being provisioned, and you can see if I have access to that, more credentials. So we can see that the more ability we have to just like have credentials lying around, the easier it is for attackers to essentially gain access to our environment. So having proper ways of storing credentials and rotating credentials is really important, because once credentials are lying around and then an attacker has access to them, boom, they have access to the environment, and then they can pretty much do whatever else, privilege escalation, data exfiltration, all of those really bad things that don't want to happen in our environment. So in order to avoid this mistake, ensure applications do not allow this IP address or any local and private IP ranges. Also ensure that IAM roles are restricted as much as possible. This also comes back to the principle of least privilege. So only provision access to as much privilege as the user needs, and nothing more, nothing less. And that's pretty much it for level 5. And we can see once again that it's always, the credentials or less privilege that leads to the much bigger bad things in our environment. So that's pretty much it for level 5. Level 6, this is the final challenge, and you're getting a user access key that has a security audit policy attached to it. See what else we can find and what else you might find in this AWS account. And we're going to be using these already provided credentials to complete the final challenge. This has been fun so far. I really enjoy this, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in level 6, which is our last and final challenge. All right, so we're back here at level 6, which is exactly where we stopped. Last level was about metadata and how that can be too much data sometimes. So level 6, we already have the credentials, right? We already have the access key ID and the secret. So we're gonna use this to create credentials and then just dive right into it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say AWS configure profile, another profile, and we're gonna name this Tsunami. Actually, no, let's name it Rainy. It's cooler. Rainy, and we're gonna use those credentials. So access key ID is this. Paste that, and secret access key is this. Copy that and paste that. All right, and then we just leave those as default. Awesome. So we already have a new profile called Rainy, and we can see that the user has a security audit policy attached to it. So we're dealing with IAM this time. So let's see what we can do. So let's do some IAM enumeration. So we're gonna start by seeing who this user is. So profile Rainy, and then we'll say get user. Oops, let's see what error what that gave us. Invalid choice. Valid choices are this profile Rainy. Okay, I was supposed to put IAM. So Rainy IAM get user. Awesome. So we're able to see the user. Username is level 6. The user ID, the ARN, and the create date. All right. So the username appears to be level 6, and we can go ahead and just try to see what policies are attached to this user. So I'm going to say AWS profile Rainy IAM. This time I'm going to specify to list attached user policies, and then specify the username, which we found to be level 6. Username is level 6, and we'll enter that. Awesome. So we see we have two attached policies. One is my security audit, and the other one is list API gateways. So that was already mentioned in level 6. So it mentioned that there was a security audit policy attached to it. So we can try to see what else we can do and what else we might find with this account. All right. So we have the ARN of both policies. So we have the ARN of this policy. This is the ARN, which is short for Amazon resource number. And then we have the ARN for this as well. So since we have the ARN, we can go ahead and get the version ID of these different policies. So what we're going to do is run the same command, but we're going to say IAM get policy. So IAM get policy, and then specify the policy ARN. And actually don't need this anymore, so just gonna take this out. All right, policy ARN, and then grab this. Let's start with the security audit policy. So security audit, copy, space, and then specify the ARN. All right, enter. All right, so we can see what this policy entails. So it's the policy ID. We can see it's version 1. Okay, we see all of the other information, description, most of the security audit capabilities. Okay, so that's more information. Let's try to do the same thing for the list API gateways one. So let's copy that ARN, copy selection, and we're just gonna clear out that ARN that we had for security audit policy, and paste the one for API gateways. All right, so kind of the same thing. We can see this is version 4. Okay, and we see the policy ID and description, list API gateways. Okay, cool. So we see we have more information about what these different policies do. Now we can actually view the actual policies to see the permissions that the policy actually provides us. So let's start with the security audit policy. We run the same command, but since we know the version, we can use version ID to specify the specific version, which is for the security audit one is version 1. So let's put v1. Oops, so I'm missing something. Version ID. Okay, so it's supposed to be IAM get policy version. So it's gonna edit that command. Get policy version. All right, awesome. So we can see all of the permissions that the security audit policy has, and this is very, very permissive. So we can describe ACM, we can list ACM. This is like super permissive. Like all of these wildcards means like any resource, like anything. So CloudFormation list stack, CloudFront, get, list, Yeah, so this is like super permissive, like really permissive. Super, yeah, like there's a lot of things we can have access to just with the permissions we have, and this is allow any resource, So this wildcard means any resource we can, and this allows any of this permissions to any of these resources. So this is excessively permissive. So let's go ahead and see the same thing for the other one, the list API gateway. So I'm gonna copy that ARN again from up here for API gateway. It's right here. Copy, and then add that at the end. And we know that's v4, so we're gonna say version ID v4. All right, so this is a little more specific. Probably might be AWS managed. So it says we're allowed to perform the get action on the API gateway resource. This is allowed, and then a specific API gateway resource. This is the REST APIs and any of the REST APIs. So this is a little more kind of specific. So basically we can get all we can get all REST APIs. And so what we want to do now is use the permissions allowed by the security audit policy to see things about Lambda. And we can see from the security audit policy, we have access to Lambda. We can list Lambda. We can get policy. We can get account settings. So let's try to see what we have access to do with that. So let's say AWS region. We know this is US West 2. Everything we've been doing for this AWS account is US West 2. So AWS region, US West 2. And we'll specify profile is rainy, profile rainy, and then we'll say lambda list functions. All right, so these are the different lambda functions. Actually, because this is the only lambda function. So this is a starter AWS lambda function, and we see everything about it. All right, cool. So let's get the policy on the level 6 function. This is the function, so we're gonna get the policy for this particular function. So let's do AWS profile rainy lambda get policy and tag function name level, actually this is uppercase L, level 6. All right, so this looks like it's policy version statement SID, so action, so the action, so the effect, so this is an allow, and a principal service, so the service is the API gateway.amazon.aws.com, action lambda invoke function, resource, this is the resource ARN for the level 6 function, and then source ARN execute API US West 2, this particular REST API ID. So this is a REST API ID for this particular REST API, because we saw that earlier on. Yeah, so we saw that this was this was in the REST APIs directory. So this is one of those REST APIs, and we see this is S33PPYPA. So that looks kind of interesting for us. So what we want to do now is, so basically what that showed us is the principal is allowed to execute invoke function, as we see here. This specific resource, so this resource that we saw here, right here, which is this S33PY REST API. And so we can go ahead and view that S33PYPPYPA REST API. So we're going to go ahead and run this command, AWS region, US West 2, profile rainy, lambda, actually not lambda, we'll say API gateway because we're doing like API, so API gateway. And you can see like there's a kind of like format that these like different commands go like kind of emulate. So we specify the region, we specify the profile, and we specify the resource. So we wanted to list S3, we did S3 ELS. We wanted to do something with IAM, we did IAM something. We wanted to describe EC2, we did EC2 something. So it's usually the service and then the action that we want to do for the service. So this time it's API gateway. So we'll say API gateway get stages, specify the REST API ID, and this is going to be S3 33 PPYPA 75 as seen here, as you can see here, and then we'll close that quote. All right, so what do we have? What do we have here? Let's make this smaller a little bit. All right, so this tells us that the stage name is prod. We see that cache clusters unavailable. So Lambda functions are called using the REST API ID, their stage name, their region, and their resource. So since we have the stage name, we have the REST API ID, which is this. All right, so what do we have here? So we see that the stage name is prod. So this is actually enough information for us. So basically, Lambda functions are called using different parameters, and the parameters are the REST API ID, the stage name, the region. So once we have all that information, we can use that to actually call the Lambda function. And so what we're gonna do is we can actually curl HTTPS, and we're gonna use that API ID, which is S33 PPYPA 75, and then we're gonna say execute API, and we specify the region US West 2, and then Amazon AWS.com / the stage name and / the resource. So level 6. It's no server error. Might have spelled something wrong. HTTPS S33PPYPA75 that execute API US West 2 that Amazon AWS.com / prod. I think it's supposed to be a lowercase l. Alright, so it's telling us go to this URL. So let's grab that URL and open link. Awesome. So we're able to use the Lambda and the API ID, the Lambda function and the API ID to eventually finally get to this final URL. And we could easily just have, instead of curling it, we could have just like use that same URL and copy. Actually, yeah, so open link, and it led us to the same thing that we just got here. So pretty much the same thing, either curl or using the web browser. I'm trying to use the command line interface more, so I'm trying to just get used to using these different commands. So there we have it. So let's look at the lessons learned. So it is common to give people and entities read-only permissions, such as the security audit policy. The ability to read your own and other IAM policies can really help an attacker figure out what exists in your environment and look for weaknesses and mistakes. So for you to avoid this mistake, don't hand out any permissions liberally, even permissions that only let you read metadata or know what your permissions are. So basically, the vulnerability here is the security audit policy allowed read access to IAM policies, which helped us as the attacker to scope the environment pretty easily. So we saw that we have a lot of access from those permissions listed for the user. So we saw this security audit policy so that we have a lot of access and all of that. So that should not, if we didn't know this, we weren't really able to know what we could do in the environment. But since we knew what we could do, and we saw that we could, we had a lot of access to Lambda, we had the API gateway access, we knew we could do specific things with those permissions. So basically, don't hand out any permissions liberally. Ensure that you only provide permissions for the job, and always utilize the principle of least privilege. So that's it for the Flaws challenge. Congratulations on completing the challenge. This was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a really great learning experience. I learned a lot about AWS security, and I hope you did too. I'm going to be going over it to continue with Flaws 2, which is the new version of Flaws, and there's two different sides to it. There's a attacker side, there's a defender side. I'll be doing both. I might start with the defender side and then go to the attacker side, or do vice versa, one of the others. But yeah, that's it for this series. I'm super excited about this series. Like, it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from it, and I hope you can find value in this in terms of learning about AWS. For today's video, if you like this video, please be sure to subscribe, like, share, all of that, and I'll see you in the next video or the next series with Flaws 2. Bye bye.